This is Turd Flinging Monkey for TFM News. I'm going to be responding to a couple articles about these female Army Rangers. I'm going to start with a USA Today article from Jim Michaels called Women Pass Ranger School But Debate Goes On. And it's basically just a recap. It talks about how these two female soldiers will graduate from the Army's Ranger School and how it's this great breakthrough and they're such heroes. And women are just as good as men and all this other stuff. There's really not a lot to this article. I just want to reference it because it's the most recent article. I want to point out the numbers that are kind of teased out within different articles. So in this article, it talks about how there were 19 female soldiers that enrolled in the Ranger School. These were the best of the best. These were the best that the Army could produce because they wanted to prove that women could pass Ranger School. So these 19 went in, only 2 made it out. It goes to show that even when you put the cream of the crop, only 2 out of 19, 10.5%. It's pretty bad. Now I want to transition to another article earlier this year from military.com called Women in Ranger School Standards. This is from August 10th, 2015 by Brandon McGarry. And I know there's been some concern that they lowered the standards. They actually didn't. According to this article, they kept the male standards. Women were expected to perform at the basic male standard. They weren't allowed to do different kinds of push-ups or different kinds of pull-ups that were easier on them. They had to meet the male standard. Now, I don't have a problem with this. In my previous videos about women in combat, I mentioned that about 4% of women can meet the male standard. Now, this is just the bare minimum male standard, and those 4% are fine. If they want to go and bleed and die, whatever. At least they can meet the male standard. It just means that the 96% of women can't. I just think it's stupid to point at the 4%, point to them and say that all women can do what all men do, or just women in general can do what men in general can do, which they clearly can. If only 4% can meet the standard on average worldwide, that you can't extrapolate a 4% outlier to women in general. You have to have at least a majority. So now I want to point to an article that just goes off the rails in Stupid Town from a website called War on the Rocks, titled Female Rangers Will Lead the Way Sooner or Later, from Today. This is the article I primarily wanted to respond to, from David Borno and Nora Banseo. Now the article begins by talking again about these 2 Army women that actually passed Ranger School. Congratulations. Now here are the standards. Now these are actually a little bit higher than the male standards for men in general in the military. So you have to do 49 push-ups, 59 sit-ups, 6 chin-ups, run 5 miles in 40 minutes, a 15-meter swim, march 12 miles in 3 hours with a 45-pound pack, navigate a cross-country compass course, traverse an elevated lob obstacle and water drop, and plunge into the water after zooming down a zip line. There you go. That's supposedly the first part where 60% of people fail, which is fine. I mean, I'm fine with higher standards. These are supposed to be the special forces, so good for them. Now, going back to the USA Today article, keep in mind that only 2 women out of 19 passed the Ranger School. How many men do you think graduated from the Ranger School? 165. So you just got to put that in perspective. There's about 4% of women in combat roles when the standards aren't lowered. And now you have 165 men versus 2 women. I'm not taking away from what these women accomplished. They're obviously above the average woman. They're in that 4% that can hang with the men and do what the men can do. 2 points. 2 women versus 165 men. Kind of puts things in perspective. And point number 2, you can't take these 2 women as some sort of proof that women in general are somehow capable. They're not. These 2 women are obviously outliers. It's great that they can meet the male standard, but they are going to be the vast minority of women. 4% is actually being kind of generous. When you look at 2 versus 165, it's good to know that they're not lowering the standard. And, I tip my hat to these women who actually passed and met the basic male standard for the Army Rangers. They definitely earned it. I'm not going to take away from their accomplishments. But I also think that feminists in the media are really jumping the shark, declaring that female Rangers will lead the way and that this is the beginning. And now that the military is open to women, women are going to prove that they can be just as capable as men. They're not. And I know this for a fact. Militaries across the world that have been open to women for years, decades, only have 4%. So even when there's a female draft, like in Israel, 4% women in combat roles, because they can't meet the standard. There you go. I mean, it's just sexual dimorphism. There's no shame in admitting that sexual dimorphism exists. And there are going to be the rare women that can actually meet the male standard, and they can go off and do great things. Great. I don't care. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't bother me. I'm not intimidated by the rare woman that can meet the male standard. Just women in general shouldn't take that as some sort of, oh, see, we've been so oppressed, and now that we're free, we can do it. No, 4% of you at best are going to do it. The other 96% of you are going to fail, and you're going to have to either have lower standards or you're going to have to just fail out. That's just a reality. That's how sexual dimorphism works. So those are my thoughts. Just thought I'd share them since I have mentioned this topic before. This is Turd